Archbishop John Wester, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Nice to be with you, Lou.
Yeah, good to see you again. Now, as we record this, we're only a day removed from the death of Pope Francis. As Archbishop, how are you grieving this loss?
Well, it's interesting, I mean, obviously the Pope's thousands of miles away, and our life here in New Mexico is much different than Rome and the Vatican. But I really felt that I'm really fond of Pope Francis. I've had the opportunity to be with him different times, and I just really was drawn to him by his gentleness, his humor, his humility. I still remember standing with the brother bishops in Washington, in Washington, St. Matthew's Cathedral, and you expect him to be in one of these big black SUVs, and he was in a Fiat, a little teeny Fiat. And so I said to the security there, I said, well, I guess one of those specially appointed Fiats with bulletproof glass. Said, no, it's just a Fiat. He said it's very difficult, Pope Francis just wants to be with the people. He doesn't like a lot of pomp and circumstance. He wants to live simply, and I just really admire that.
Now, Pope Francis, as you mentioned, he stood out among his predecessors in a lot of ways, including that. Notably, also, he was the first Latin American pontiff, first of the Jesuit order. How is his approach to the papacy also unique?
I think for me, Pope Francis, obviously there's a lot of continuity with his predecessors, but I think he really raised up the importance of pastoral ministry as a pope, that he's not just a bureaucrat or an administrator or a teacher with documents and such, but that he is all of that, but he's really pastoral. He cares about people, and he wants to be with the people and bring Christ's love and mercy and compassion to them. And so he did that in any way that he could, whether it be hugging that gentleman with that disease where he had tumors all over his skin, or whether it be rushing to Lampedusa to pray for the immigrants who were drowning in the Mediterranean Sea. No matter what it was, he was constantly trying to communicate to people that the church cares about you.
Hundreds of Catholics and non-Catholics alike have been streaming into your cathedral, the Basilica in Santa Fe, and really across New Mexico since the Pope's death. What reflections have you heard from those coming into your church?
They're very personal comments that people say. They say, I'm going to miss him, or I really was fond of him, or he really meant a lot to me. So it's clear to me that he did connect with people and that they appreciated him. As you say, Catholics and non-Catholics, I was very edified and grateful to have the presence of the Episcopal priest, Father Robin was there yesterday. Reverend Harry was there. Talitha was there from the United Church, Reverend Talitha. And we had some good representation there. Mark was there from the Episcopal Church. We had Rabbi Neil Answich sent me a message of condolence. So I was very pleased to see that that people connected to Pope Francis. And so it was kind of and so, I think, he was really, really well loved. And any opposition that he did get, any pushback he did get, sadly came sometimes from within the Catholic Church, not from without the Catholic Church.
Now, of course, you might be able to relate to this living in New Mexico. The majority of New Mexican Catholics are Hispanic. What have you heard about the importance over the years that played for them, the fact that he was Latin American and that he spoke Spanish?
I think that was a big part of his appeal to our Latino and Hispanic parishioners. I think that meant a lot to them. They were proud that one of their own, so to speak, was elected as Pope. And I think too, it's more than just the language. I think there's the culture, the Latin American culture is one that's very caring, very compassionate, very family oriented. It's a culture that cares about unity, I would say, more than ideology on the whole. I'm painting this with a broad brush, but I think those are themes that are valid for that culture. And I think that the Pope brought that to the papacy.
Now, Pope Francis appointed you in 2015, and you got to meet him on several occasions. You mentioned one of those. The two of you agreed on several key issues. What are some other stories that you have about the moments with him, and what do you remember about your agreement on key issues?
Well, I think on the key issues, I think to me, he was willing to boldly use the Star Trek, boldly go where no one has gone before. You know? He was able to he was a unifier, but he was not tepid, you know, he wasn't timid. He was able to take steps he thought that needed to be taken. And I thought that was very important. So reaching out to the LGBTQ community, for example, that famous line that gets quoted a lot, although it's not often put in context, but he said, you know, who am I to judge? He would say ambiguous things from time to time. And I think my sense is that he was not only okay with that, but he thought that was a good thing. In other words, let's probe this a bit. One of his quotes that I've used a lot is, you know, the bishops, part of our role as bishops is to teach. We're teachers in the church, you know, teach, govern, and sanctify are the three main areas of what we do as bishops. And the Pope said, yes, the bishop must teach, but a good teacher listens first. I think Pope Francis demonstrated that he listened to people. He didn't just go off and say, okay, you're wrong or whatever, but he said, well, let me hear what you have to say. You know, what's your experience? So what is it like to be a single mom raising children? Or what's it like to be unemployed? What's it like to be living in Gaza right now? He called that one parish, is one Catholic parish in Gaza. He called them even in the hospital when he was so sick with double pneumonia, pretty much every day he still called them and let them know he was praying for them and to giving them support, moral support. So he was somebody who listened to people and encountered people, believed in encountering people and journeying with them. And then in the midst of that journey, he can proclaim the gospel. And if people were open to it, then that was good. You know, so he was just, his style, I think, his approach was very human, very compassionate. And I really admire that.
Santa Fe's Cathedral Basilica of St. Francis of Assisi is named after the saint whom Pope Francis took his name for. Who was St. Francis of Assisi, and what did his legacy tell us about the value of the late Pope and potentially the Archdiocese of Santa Fe as well?
Well, that was very significant. We all thought when he was first elected in 2013 that he said, I will be called Francis. And we thought, of course, right away, Francis Xavier, who was a Jesuit saint, and he's a Jesuit. So, but he clarified that immediately. He said, no, I mean St. Francis of Assisi, sometimes called the Poverino of Assisi, the poor one, the poor one of Assisi. So that said volumes right there. Of course, in 2,000 years of popes, he's the first one to take the name, you know, and so that was really quite significant, where his heart was.
Now, with the process of selecting a new Pope on the horizon now, are you concerned at all about the possibility of a new leader who doesn't share your opinions on some of the social and humanitarian issues, the compassion, perhaps? I'm not insinuating that the new Pope wouldn't be compassionate, but to the level of Pope Francis. And what would that mean for New Mexico? What are you hoping for in this selection process?
I'll say, am I hopeful? Or I'd say yes and no.
Okay.
Yes, insofar as I really do believe that the Holy Spirit guides the process. Remember, Francis was elected by cardinals, most of whom were appointed by Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict. So if people see a kind of a shift, you know, it's interesting that the cardinals who elected Francis were appointed by those popes. So on the other hand, it's a divine and human church, and so politics has its place. You know, I know for some people politics is a dirty word, but reality is it's political. They're going to be thinking about, you know, who's it going to be, and they're going to try to pick the person who will, you know, they'll look at what's been going on, where have we been, where we are, where we're going to go, and try to get the best person for that. So my hope would be that it would be someone very much like Francis, Pope Francis II, and somebody that will continue his legacy of listening, of caring for the poor. I think also, given the geopolitical stage we're on today in the world, I would hope, I see myself, the Pope, and other religions too, of course, but I see the Pope as standing against a lot of what we're seeing today in the world, dictators, authoritarianism, a disregard for the poor, people in developing countries, a disregard for climate disruption and climate change, a disregard for the dignity of the worker, a disregard for immigrants, people who are on the move, who are fleeing persecution, who are, a disregard for the dignity of the human person. A lot of the political leaders we see in the world today are very much, in my view anyway, tuned to the rich, and money seems to be the driving force if you get down to it. And the Pope, I think, stands against all that and says, no, it's not about money. It's the worker, it's the person. We can transfer across borders money and goods, but not people. People are expendable. As long as the money gets there, as long as the goods get there, but people we don't care so much about. That's the message I get from a lot of the governments around the world today, more and more. And so I think that the Catholic Church, and certainly other churches as well, need to stand up against that and need to proclaim the gospel that this is just not right.
I appreciate that. Archbishop Wester, thank you so much.
You're welcome, Lou. Always good to be with you. Thanks very much.